Hello, my name is Zan. Welcome back if you are a returning viewer / subscriber, and it is nice to meet you if you are a new viewer / subscriber. This is my first video that I'm doing with my beautiful hijab on, and I actually agonized over which hijab to wear for this video because I was going out earlier today and I was like, I should wear something pretty, but then I was like, I'm lazy, so I didn't. So I just put on my jersey hijab, which is like a 10-second hijab. Anyway, so yes, this is what I look like with my hijab on, and I quite like it. I think today I'm going to talk about some do's and don'ts of interacting with people with disabilities, and I didn't organize it into like a this is what you do list and this is what you do not list. I'm just going to kind of go through as in like a tips kind of fashion. So we're going to start with how to talk to us, because that's one of the things that sort of grinds my gears the most, is when I see people doing baby talk to people who are in wheelchairs or people with like some kind of a disfigurement or a cognitive or intellectual disability. That really pisses me off. And there are a lot of people with disfigurements and like cognitive and intellectual disabilities that will say the same thing, that they're not stupid, so don't talk to them like they are babies, because they're not. I used to work in a group home for people with, not just people with cognitive or developmental disabilities. Like we had a couple of our residents had cerebral palsy. So not everybody in the group home had cognitive or intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities of any kind. But a lot of them would say sometimes, like if we went out to an event or we went out shopping or something and people started talking to them and they used this cute little baby voice and, oh my goodness, how are you today? We would get in the car and they would all be like, God, I hate that. Like, why do people do that? And so please don't, please don't. You can talk to us like normal. You can talk to us like I'm talking to you right now. There's no shame in that. And if, even if you're interacting with children who are non-disabled, able-bodied, however you want to describe people who do not have a disability, even if you're talking to children, you can still talk to them with an adult voice. It's like, a lot of times in my experience, a lot of times kids don't like to be talked to in that sort of baby sort of talk voice. So don't do that. Just talk to us like normal. The next thing is try to be as accommodating as possible. Some people would be like, oh, that's obvious, but other people, you may not totally realize, especially if you are able-bodied, non-disabled, sometimes it doesn't quite cross your mind. So if somebody says like, I need a place to sit, or I need an interpreter, or I need a clear, unobstructed path that takes the shortest route possible from point A to point B, do your absolute best to try to accommodate that. Especially if somebody has an invisible illness, because a lot of times people with invisible illnesses are not they're not accommodated as much as other people are. So do try to be as accommodating as possible. If somebody says, I need this, or somebody says, I need an environment that is not noisy, or I need to have a quiet room to go into in case the environment that we are in is too noisy. Try to be accommodating to that. Listen to what these people are saying and try to do your best to meet their needs. able-bodied people live in a world where their needs are constantly met. Like, that is the status quo. But disabled people live in a world where we constantly have needs that go unmet. Needs. Needs? Needs. We constantly have needs that go unmet. So try to be as accommodating as possible to your guests or patrons in your business, any kind of area, your home, office, whatever it may be. Do your best to be accommodating, please, for the love of all that we hold holy and dear. Please try to be accommodating. Along the same lines, be respectful of boundaries and limitations. And this kind of goes along with one of the other things that I have on my list, which is the need for being respect our need for being flexible. That's what I'm trying to say. So if we say, I have a boundary that you can't cross, or like the prime example of this is triggers. Like trigger warnings. If I say, don't talk to me about ... be respectful of that boundary. That is a limitation that shouldn't be crossed, that nobody ever should cross. Also, being respectful of boundaries doesn't just mean mental health boundaries, but if somebody says, I can't walk up a flight of stairs, or I can't walk up more than one step, don't tell them well, there's 2 or 3 steps, or there's 2 flights of stairs, or whatever the case may be. If you're planning to go out somewhere with somebody and they say, hey, I have this boundary, I have this limitation that I need to be really aware of, then it's also your responsibility as someone who is planning the outing to be aware of that and find a place that is going to be mutually accommodating to everybody. Be respectful of our need for flexibility. So sometimes if somebody makes a plan, says, yeah, I can be there this day, and then they have a chronic illness or a chronic condition of some kind that flares up that day, and they call you and say, I'm sorry, I said I was going to be there, but I'm, having a flare-up of pain, or I, whatever the case may be. In my case, it would be, I'm sorry, I'm having a seizure. Be respectful of our need for flexibility in when we can and cannot do things. Some days we may be golden and good to go, and other days we may not. We may have to stay in bed for most of the day or all of the day, or whatever the case may be. So be respectful of flexibility. That kind of rolls into the next comment of don't judge. Or at the very least, keep your judgmental and hateful, potentially, comments to yourself. I know a lot of people, when they make comments, they don't have the intention of sounding or being hateful, but a lot of times that's kind of how it comes across, is it's not because you're not being supportive and loving and showing your support for the person who has the disability. It comes across as being very rude, even if that's not necessarily your intention. So please don't judge, but if you catch yourself judging, don't make the comment out loud, because it's hurtful, it's hateful. We don't need more of that in the world. We need more peace and more acceptance and more tolerance in the world. So don't add to that judgmental yuck that goes around like wildfire in our society. Also, don't make assumptions. I cannot tell you how many times I've had somebody come up to me who knows me who sees me one day maybe without my crutch, or maybe if I was in my wheelchair the previous day and I'm not the next day, and they come up to me and they're like, oh, you must be doing better because you're not using your wheelchair. And I'm like, well, that's, you can keep thinking that, sure. Because that a lot of times, like, if I'm not using my mobility device, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm doing better. It just means that I'm not having a seizure and I'm not having problems with my mobility. But that doesn't mean that my health as a whole is doing better. So don't make assumptions about our condition, especially those of us who have invisible illnesses. The other thing about that too is if you see somebody using a mobility device, don't underestimate their ability to get around. Like, for example, not everybody who uses a wheelchair can't walk. So, like, for example, for me, if I'm having a day where I'm having a seizure in just one leg, and so it's difficult for me to walk more than a few paces, I can still get up out of my wheelchair and walk a few paces if necessary. Like if we're having a hard time getting me over a threshold while I'm sitting in my wheelchair, I will get up and walk over the threshold and then have somebody like lift my chair over the threshold. So don't underestimate. If you've got a friend who's got a disability and they use a mobility device and you're afraid to like invite them over because you're not sure about how to get them inside of your house, ask them. Be like, hey, if I invited you over, would you be able to, make it up the 2 or 3 steps into my house? Or, if my house isn't okay, is there another place that you would like to go? Maybe we can go get coffee. Maybe we can come to your house, anything like that. There's no harm in asking somebody, are you able to do this thing? As long as you're asking very respectfully. Don't assume anything. There's no harm in asking, but please make sure that you are asking in a very respectful way. Because, like, I can't tell you how many times people have assumed things about my abilities, and then I've either had to disappoint them or I've like overshot their expectations. So if you're wondering, just ask. Please just ask. Like, we don't mind questions. The majority of us don't mind questions. I absolutely do not mind questions. In fact, I love it when people ask me questions about my disability and my abilities and what I can and can't do and what my limitations and boundaries are. I love that because it means that people are being aware and mindful of what I need. So the last point I'm going to make is don't confront somebody about their disability. And what I mean by confront is like, don't accost them. Don't be like verbally or physically harassing to somebody about their disability. I have had friends that have had people make rude comments to them about needing to use the power shopping carts like at like Walmart or Target or wherever they're going, because people didn't see my friend's invisible illness. If somebody is using a power shopping cart, no matter how old or how young or what they look like or any of that, there's a reason that they're using it, and just let them be, honestly. Don't come up to them and be like, you're too young to be using that. Like, that's disrespectful to your elders, and go on and on and on, because you don't know what that person, you don't know what their health condition is. You don't know why they're in the chair. So yeah, don't confront somebody about their disability like that in a rude or negative way. Like, that's super not okay about like anything. Again, this kind of circles back to the questions. If you have questions, if you're genuinely curious about, somebody, especially if it's somebody that you kind of know, like maybe a classmate or a coworker or something, and you know, you're curious, I'm sure that they probably wouldn't mind saying like, hey, you know, I noticed you were using a power scooter the other day, or I noticed you were using a walker the other day, or a wheelchair, or I noticed that you were using some other assistive device the other day, but you're not today. I'm curious, would you be okay and open to discussing this with me, because I'd like to, you know, be aware of, you know, if there's anything that I can do to help accommodate you, or, you know, I'm curious, would you be willing and open to share with me? You know, those kinds of questions, those are okay. You know, curiosities are okay. Just don't be like, don't sit over in the corner and be like, well, they must be faking their disability because they're not using whatever the device is today that they were using the other day. Like, that's not okay. That's never okay. So yeah, just in general, be super respectful, be aware of everybody's needs. Everybody has different needs. Ask if you're not sure. Don't make assumptions. Don't be judgmental. Talk to us like regular human beings, because we are regular human beings. So yeah, just, you know, be mindful, be respectful, be open, and don't be an asshole. Anyway, that's it for this video, you guys. I will see you in the next video.